Shalom. Can I be heard now? Can I be heard now? Shalom. Shalom. Can I be heard now? Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that particular matter, brothers and sisters. All right. We want to get back into this. And I thank you for letting me know that there was no volume. Giving honor and praise to the Most High, the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name, Yeshaya Yisrael, of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This presentation regarding Black History Month is called Black History in the Old Testament, Part 1. Now, I do apologize for the little tardiness and starting at, say, 8:30, 8:35, as opposed to 8 p.m. Wanted to sit there and set this up in a particular manner. This is the first time of me going live regarding StreamYard. And I want to give thanks to a good friend of mine who actually helped me and guided me through this in this particular manner. All right. Now, let us go on into the next slide for edification purposes. We, the Israelites, during Black History Month, want to explain a matter. The Old Testament is more about Black history than some may know. The biblical characters are largely Negroes, according to J. Rogers in his book. The Chaldeans were originally Negroes, according to Higgins in his book. The Jews were believed to be from Ethiopia, according to Tacitus in his book. The Assyrians have the Negro eye and full lips, according to Harry Johnston in his book. So, brothers and sisters, what we wanted to do was just go over a particular matter showing how the Assyrians, the Israelites, the Chaldeans, brothers and sisters, would be today what you would call Black people. Now, we might look here, brothers and sisters, and see, all right, the word Jew. The reason why that is because I was citing the particular author, but we know good and well, brothers and sisters, that Jew should be Yisrael or Israel. So now we want to, as pointed out respectfully, brothers and sisters, take advantage of the fact that our people are listening regarding Black history, and we, the Israelites, brothers and sisters, want to point out a particular matter regarding this subject. Okay, let us continue in this particular presentation. This is a map showing the distance from Assyria to Ethiopia. All right, what we are looking at here, brothers and sisters, is the land where Assyria is at in the ancient world. They ruled, brothers and sisters, where Babylon was over in this vicinity. Brothers and sisters, they ruled over where Egypt was in this vicinity. They ruled, brothers and sisters, in history where this area was here in Nubia, aka Kush, aka Ethiopia. So these are things we want to talk about in this channel in past times. We have gone over extensively of the matter between the Israelites and the Assyrians, between the Babylonians and the Assyrians. However, with the fact of this timing being called and referred to as, quote, Black History Month, we want to, brothers and sisters, respectfully take advantage of the fact that we cannot, in history, neglect the African continent and how it relates to the history of the Israelites. So these are things, brothers and sisters, we want to point out for edification purposes, if we will. All right. So without any further ado, let us continue on in this next part. Second Chronicles chapter 12 and First Chronicles chapter 4. And here is what we read, brothers and sisters. And it came to pass, when the kingdom of Rehoboam was established, and he was strong, that he forsook the law of the Most High and all Yisrael with him. So, brothers and sisters, there's something to be pointed out, that it says the kingdom of Rehoboam. Now, we know, brothers and sisters, that Rehoboam was the son of Solomon. All right. Now, once his kingdom was established, this being after the divided monarchy, he is still in part referred to and talking about all Israel, but we know that's the southern kingdom of Judah. So, with that being the case, we know within the Israelite understanding, politically, they were separated between Judah and Israel. But we also know good and well, brothers and sisters, that they were still one people. All right. So, these are things we want to point out in that particular case. And it came to pass in the 5th year of Rehoboam that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem because they had dealt treacherously with the Most High, with 1,200 chariots and 70,000 horsemen. And the people were without number that came with him out of Egypt, the Lubim, the Suquim, and the Ethiopians. Now, brothers and sisters, what we just read, right, comes from 2nd Chronicles chapter 12, verse 1 through 3. And we see that Shishak, brothers and sisters, also known in history by many as Shishak, that ruled in dynasty 22 of ancient Egypt, brothers and sisters, that he came with people against the people of Judah. Now, brothers and sisters, the reason why this besiegement happened was because of the wickedness that happened, and that was being done by the people of Judah themselves. So these are things we want to point out why the children of Israel fell, and showing the history of who were some of the people that came up against the house of Israel. All right. So we want to, brothers and sisters, show that it mentions the Lubim, the Suquim, and the Ethiopians. Now, Shishak himself in Dynasty 22, Shishak the first, brothers and sisters, was a pharaoh that ruled, you understand, during the time and during the era, brothers and sisters, of the 22nd dynasty, but he himself was a Libyan, or the people that the Egyptians will refer to as the Libu people. All right. So that's something we want to emphasize for edification purposes. All right. And it says now in 1st Chronicles 4, verse 40 in particular, and they found fat pasture and good, and the land was wide and quiet and peaceable, for they that dwelt there aforetime were of Ham. So now when we read here, brothers and sisters, of Ham, right? We're talking, brothers and sisters, in this particular case, of the Hamim. That is to say, the people of the Hamite people. All right. Now, this is talking about the people of Simeon in this particular case in 1st Chronicles chapter 4. All right. And in this particular matter, what we're reading about is where the land was, as it stated, wide and quiet and peaceable. Where the children of Israel or Israel eventually went to originally was inhabited by the people whom the scriptures refer to as the Hamim or the Hamites. Now, that's something to be pointed out just in this verse right here. We just want to point that out in this verse right here. That is from 1st Chronicles 4. This other part is in 2nd Chronicles 12, where it talks about, brothers and sisters, where the people, the Israelites, were attacked by these particular Hamite nations as time went on. All right. So that's just something we want to emphasize in that particular matter. Let's continue. 2nd Chronicles chapter 14, verse 9 through verse 15. Giving a shout out to Sotir Records, Shalom, and to Laban Gabara. Shalom to you too. Thank you for the comment in the comment section. In 2nd Chronicles 14, verse 9 to 15, we see, and they came out against Zerah, pardon me, and they came out against them, Zerah the Ethiopian, with a host of 1,000 and 300 chariots, and came unto Mareshah. Then Asa went out against him, and they set the battle in array in the valley of Zapatha at Mareshah. Now, brothers and sisters, let us look at this particular aspect here. We have Mareshah, Zapatha, Brothers and sisters, these don't sound like European names, in all due respect. Just wanted to throw that out there, if we will. And Asa cried unto the Lord his God and said, Lord, it is nothing with thee to help, whether with many or with them that have no power. Help us, O Yah Eloheinu, O Lord our God, for we rest on thee, and in thy name we go against this multitude, O Yah. Thou art our Elohim, our God. Let no man prevail against thee. So Yah smote the Ethiopians before Asa and before Judah, and the Ethiopians fled. And Asa and the people that were with him pursued them unto Gerar, and the Ethiopians were overthrown, and they could not recover themselves, for they were destroyed before Yah and before his host, and they carried away very much spoil. Now, let us, if we will, brothers and sisters, emphasize on something about this. And it says, and they carried away very much spoil. Who carried away the spoil, brothers and sisters? The Israelites. The Israelites carried away the spoil, all right, of the Ethiopians. So now when we get to the time of Asa, let us remember just right here, brothers and sisters, with the aspect of Rehoboam, you had Shishak, the king of Egypt, who was of the Libyan people, right? Then you had Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa. So less brothers and sisters than 50 years from the time of Rehoboam to the time of Asa, you again have Cushites or Ethiopians coming up against the Israelites. So these are things we just want to show biblically on what we're talking about for edification purposes. All right. And it goes on to say in verse 14, and they smote all the cities round about Gerar, for the fear of Yah came upon them, and they spoiled all the cities, for there was exceeding much spoil in them. Now, for those who are familiar, you will know that Gerar is over not far from where the Philistines were. The Philistines in biblical timeline come from the land of Crete. Crete, brothers and sisters, we're gonna put inside of the comment section here, all right, is where the Philistines come from. And the biblical name in that case is called Kaftor. That's why in the book of Amos, it says, and the Philistines from Kaftor. So this is what we want to talk about for edification purposes, the areas, the places, and the time frame in which we're talking about. Now, of course, there are some Israelites who shun the idea of quote unquote Black History Month. Okay, that be your thing. Nonetheless, brothers and sisters, we want to emphasize and we want to point out why we are doing this as well. It is because, as pointed out, our people's attention is during this time. And we want to, among many others, if you will, point out our history and what we've been emphasizing on and what we've been talking upon, brothers and sisters. So let us, if we will, continue on in this particular manner. Thank you again for the time, brothers and sisters. And I say in due respect, I don't call grown men and women students. People refer to me as a more, and I respect that, but I ain't gonna call no grown man or no grown woman a student. It's just not my ruach, if you will. Do you understand? All right, verse 15. They smote also the tents of cattle and carried away sheep and camels in abundance and returned to Jerusalem. So, all right, let's point this out, brothers and sisters. It's called the spoils of war. And in this case, it benefited the Israelites. As you know, in the time of Saul, it didn't work good with the Israelites with the spoils of war, because after Saul, Malchishua, Aminadab, and Yehonatan, his sons, passed away. You understand? In war, we'll begin to see, know, and understand that the Philistines came the next day or so to strip the slain. That's what happens in war. So these nations, they, yes, were all people of color, if you will, or today called quote unquote, if you would say black. But brothers and sisters, they did not have a race matter once it came down to who they went to war with. It was a tribal and national thing. It was not a color thing once it came down, say, to the ancient nations in this particular case. So, brothers and sisters, in light of that, we want to continue in this particular manner as I change from one phone line to the next, pardon that, and let us see what else we can gather. Remember, from the era of Rehoboam of Judah all the way down to Rehoboam, Abijah, and Asa, you then begin to see this particular matter right here. Let us go to the next part, brothers and sisters. 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 9, and Isaiah chapter 37, verse 9. And it reads, brothers and sisters, in this particular aspect. And when he heard say of Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, behold, he is come out to fight against thee, he sent messages again unto Hezekiah, saying, and it goes on to say in Isaiah 37, verse 9, and he heard say of Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, he is come forth to make war with thee. And when he heard it, he sent messages to Hezekiah, saying, okay, so the point we want to emphasize, all right, brothers and sisters, in this particular case, is you have Tirhakah of Ethiopia. And here we have Tirhakah of Ethiopia mentioned in the Bible more than once. Now, he ruled in Egypt, but he was an Ethiopian or Cushite by descent. During the era of Tirhakah, which we're going to talk about a little bit, he did not really have many problems with the Israelites. The Israelites did not really have problems with the Cushites or the Ethiopians during the era of Tirhakah. In the book that I wrote called Deuteronomy 28, verse 15 to 68, History Untold to the Masses, it tells you that the angel of the Lord smote the camp of the Assyrians. One of the things I point out, when it says angel, it says in the Hebrew word malach, which means messenger. So we may not have to think per se of angels in the biblical timeline or the biblical language, such as saying one who had to have the seraphim that you see of in the book of Isaiah 6, and the seraphim and the ophanim and the holy coyote. For those who are familiar with those terminologies from Isaiah chapter 6, a human being can also be a malach or translated as angel. Because what it means in Hebraic thought, brothers and sisters, is a messenger. All right. So, brothers and sisters, if I can within the YouTube be heard, all right, can I get a one, brothers and sisters, because I can't hear myself, and I appreciate that particular matter, if we will. Now, when we're talking in regards, brothers and sisters, to Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, this is again during the era of the 25th dynasty of Egypt. Now, Tirhakah, brothers and sisters, is a situation that we see in the scriptures. So we want to show in this timeline as pointed out, if we will, Black history in the Old Testament. Let us continue on in this particular matter, if we will. Thank you for the people who typed in one. The 25th dynasty of Egypt is as follows. Kashta started dynasty 25, and its capital being at Gebel Markal. Pagi, also known as Pianki, Kashta's brother and successor, from 744 to 714 BCE. He defeated the kings of dynasty 24. All right, so now, brothers and sisters, when we talk about the aspect, say, of dynasty 24, that again is during the era of the Egyptian rulership of themselves. This is in what they call a historical time frame, the third intermediate period of Egypt, which goes from dynasty 21 all the way to dynasty 25. Now, in dynasty 21, you had it to where you had the people ruling in Thebes, which is in southern Egypt, and then you had the people ruling in Tanis, which is in northern Egypt. So you had some of the kings of Egypt that were ruling at the same time. In the book that I wrote, Thinking the Most High, it is a book called Egypt Talk and Writing. I spoke about how the different dynasties of Egypt intermingled with each other and how some of the pharaohs ruled at the same time. Now, for those familiar with the history of that, this gets into importance because this is when you read the record of Manetho, he didn't separate it between one king and the next. It just went chronological timeline all the way down without regard to whether the king ruled at the same time or not. So this is why you find different dynasties pushed all the way back. So when they say, oh, the biblical timeline talking about the pharaohs doesn't match up. It's not so much that the Bible is at fault, but it's more so whether you're dealing with the Abydos record, whether you're dealing with the Saqqara record, whether you're dealing with the Ramesses record, whether you're dealing with the Mercer Steel record. So it all depends really on which chronological time frame of Egypt itself you're dealing with. Now, by the time we get here to Dynasty 25 is when the Cushites were ruling in Egypt. So now we begin to see, brothers and sisters, as pointed out right here, Taharqa is mentioned in the Bible twice. All right. And what we also, brothers and sisters, would like to, in respect, point out is that other kings of this era, or another king, if we will, of this era too, is mentioned in the biblical timeline of what we're going to be talking about and what we're going to show for evidence purposes. All right. So let us, in light of that, continue in what we are going to be talking about and what we're going to be emphasizing on. Now, the Assyrians were coming up as a power in what we call this era here. If you see here where I'm highlighting this particular part, 744 to 714 BCE, this whole era here that we're talking about is referred to in history as the 8th century BCE. This correlates with the Assyrian timeline of of Tiglath-Pileser. This correlates with the time of Shalmaneser and Sargon of Assyria. Also with Sargon's successor being Sennacherib. Sennacherib, we're going to show, brothers and sisters, invaded the land of Egypt. We're going to show, brothers and sisters, how these kingdoms, as we pointed out, going all the way for those who joined later on, all right, going all the way back here, a map showing from Assyria. This is the area that we're talking about here in this particular presentation. All right, so let us go here and look and remember Taharqa, whom we spoke about in the scriptures. Okay, let us continue in this particular matter. Now, this is Shabaka and Taharqa, two of the kings mentioned. Okay, Taharqa is shown here on the right side with the nose tripped off, if you will. All right, and Shabaka is shown here with the nose there in this particular case. We've pointed out on this channel in the past that the historian, as we just pointed out earlier in this presentation, that the historian Tacitus stated that in his day and time, during the era of the Roman Empire, you understand that the Jews or the Israelites, as we better know the terminology to be, that they were mistaken as the Ethiopians. We already pointed out and know in the scriptures in Genesis chapter 50, all right, for those who are familiar with this, in Genesis, all right, chapter 50, the Israelites were mistaken as the Egyptians. Moses was called an Egyptian, but we know good and well that he was not an Egyptian ethnically. And as we pointed out, some of these nations, brothers and sisters, had quarrelsome and wars one with another. You understand? We know good and well that the woman who accused Joseph in the Bible of assaulting her sexually, you understand? That she said, you brought this Hebrew here to mock us. So, brothers and sisters, if Joseph was called the Hebrew, according to his own volition in Genesis, and according to what the woman Potiphar's wife said of him of being a Hebrew, we know that the Hebrew people were not foreign to the said quote unquote, if we will, African nations. They were acquainted with the Hebrews. Brothers and sisters, one of the main languages in Ethiopia is Amharic. I want to put this inside of the spelling in here. Amharic, if we will. That's the language that the philosophers speak, by the way. So Amharic is lingually, that is say of language matters, connected to but not limited to, if we will, to Hebrew. Amharic and Hebrew, the languages are connected to each other in linguistics. So these are things, brothers and sisters, that we want to point out for reference purposes. So let us continue on in what we're talking about. All right. Notes in 2 Kings chapter 17. Ethiopia is mentioned in the Bible over 40 times. During the era of Solomon, after that is of Israel, Egypt began to decline, and this was referred to as the third intermediate period of Egypt, dynasty 21 to dynasty 25. Now, in the Bible, we're going to show what we were talking about. All right. And it says this: and the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hosea, the son of Elah, to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Most High, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hosea became his servant and gave him presents. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hosea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria went up throughout all the land, and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria took Samaria, and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Halah, and Habor, by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. So, we want to point this out for reference purposes, if we will. Somebody wrote in, Amharic has a lot of Hebrew loan words. I speak some Amharic. All right, when I get better, Laban Gabara, when I get better, I would like you in time so we can talk about online, like correspond, you speak, I speak, as I get better with this StreamYard matter, so we can talk on a lingual matter of the connection between the two. The ancestor of Amharic Ge'ez is closer to Hebrew than it is Amharic. Ge'ez is very similar to Hebrew. Now, I've heard of Ge'ez, and I remember seeing Amharic written, but I know more about Amharic than Ge'ez. So I definitely appreciate the information that you stated about Ge'ez being very similar to Hebrew, because as we know, Hebrew is listed as part of the quote Afro-Asiatic languages. So with that being the case, it's something we want to point out for reference purposes. All right. Okay. Now, what we're seeing right here, brothers and sisters, is this. It said that Hosea has sent messengers to So, the king of Egypt, if we will, right? This So, king of Egypt, brothers and sisters, is whom we're talking about here, Shabaka. Shabaka ruled before Taharka. All right. So we read of Taharka, brothers and sisters, in 2 Kings chapter 19. We read of Shabaka here mentioned simply as So, king of Egypt. Now, there are people who might say that it might have been Asar Khan who ruled in dynasty 23 of Egypt. But one of the things to point out is that dynasty 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25 all was within the same intermediate era of each other. So it's not like it was one king and then the other and then the other. All of those kings ruled in the same different dynasties throughout the same country and so forth and so on. So that's something we want to point out. But from the studies the brother has done, thinking the Most High, this So king of Egypt, mentioned in 2 Kings 17 verse 4, is not Egyptian king by lineal descent, brothers and sisters, but rather, if we will, Ethiopian king who ruled on the throne of Egypt, again, during the era of dynasty 25 of Egypt. Then it goes on to say concerning Shalmaneser, it says, then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. Now, Samaria, as we pointed out on this channel, was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. because at first it was at Shechem, then Tirzah, and then by the time Omri came and then solidified by Ahab, king of Israel, you had it to where Samaria became the capital, all right, of the northern kingdom of Israel. So it says, in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Syria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. The Medes, brothers and sisters, was not that far from where the Assyrian people were. So that's something, again, we want to point out, if we will, for edification purposes. Notes. Shabaka, as we mentioned, in his 2nd year of ruling, went to the Sinai to establish his rule there. Now, brothers and sisters, we know good and well that the Sinai, all right, is the area between Egypt and Canaan. It's the area between Kemet and the Levant. It's the area between Samatawi and the land of Palestine. So we can understand certain terminologies for some of the same land masses that we're speaking of. So Shabaka, in the 2nd year of ruling, it was not, and this is long before the Suez Canal was built. They traveled back and forth between, if we use the terminologies, African nations and Western Asiatic nations. They traveled back and forth between Africa and Asia. That was not a very uncommon practice to go from one landmass to the other, from one landmass to the other. All right. So we spoke about this on other matters, such as Thutmose III of Egypt did it. Jacob, the father of Joseph, did it. Abraham, the father of Isaac, did it. Seti I of Dynasty 19 of Egypt did it. So you can name some of the prominent, if we will, people between the Asiatic nations and even some of the African nations that went between the area of the Levant all the way into Egypt, back and forth. So that's something we want to point out. Now, brothers and sisters, with the map provided, what we want to show is this is the area we're talking about. Here's Egypt, Jerusalem, as you see right here. This area here shown being circled, that would be, you understand, the area of, said, the Levant matter. So the people traveled back and forth as if it was just what they do. So now we shouldn't be alarmed when we see an information that Shabaka mentioned as So, king of Egypt, and 2 Kings 17 did the same thing. He built places that are still in Thebes, Abydos, and Memphis. Now, brothers and sisters, he built more in more other places, but we had space matters in this particular presentation. In this particular matter, we want to, if we will, all right, show that highlighted and underlined and bold type, the matter of Memphis. And I want to emphasize how important that is and what we're going to be talking about in this particular presentation. Because when you speak about Memphis in the ancient Egyptian, they refer to it as Menofer, Menofer. The children of Israel, or the Israelites, or the Hebrews, they refer to that area as the people of Noph, Noph. And you see that within the scriptures. All right. Shabaka's general, named Reu, fought against the Assyrians. He lost to the Assyrians. After this, the relations between the Assyrians and the Cushites were at peace. Seals from Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, confirms this, that Sargon and Shabaka were at a time being peaceful. So you can have it to where nations will be at odds and the nations will be at peace. So what can we point out? We pointed out earlier that during the 22nd dynasty of Egypt, that the people of the Ethiopians, in part with the Libyans and other nations, came against the Israelites. By the time you get to dynasty 25, the Israelites and the Ethiopians really did not have any conflict or problems between one another. During the era of, in part with Sargon, who was the son of Shalmaneser, he, in time, and Shabaka were at peace. So you can be at odds at one point and then at peace with another. These are things we want to show for evidence purposes. After such a time, we see that the Assyrians and the Ethiopians, as just stated, were not at peace with each other. So it was an up and down kind of thing. lukewarm, if you want to put it in terms like that. Peace war between these ancient nations that we're talking about. All right, so let's go on, if we will, to the next slide. Isaiah in the Bible, chapter 20. In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, when Sargon, king of Assyria, sent him, and fought against Ashdod and took it. Brothers and sisters, what do we want to point out in this particular case here? This is Tartan, if we will, said in this particular case here. And we want to show this highlighted, if we will. Different color. Also in red. Brothers and sisters, when you study the information and look up the information of what we are talking about, all right, we know good and well and understand that the terminology Tartan that we see there, if we will, brothers and sisters, it comes, trying to get the right pronunciation, pardon that, from the Assyrian terminology Tartanu. All right? And what that term means, brothers and sisters, is one that holds a particular rank and one who holds a particular status, if we will, in this particular case. So, brothers and sisters, when we're seeing that, what that means is one of authority. That's not say a person's name. That terminology, Tartan, or said as Tartunu, inside of its Assyrian aspect, if we will, means one that's of rank, like a soldier, a captain, a sergeant, if you will. All right. Now, Ashdod, all right, as we can see right here, we want to underline this and show bold or highlight it, or pardon me, put it in italics, right? What we want to point out with that, Ashdod is in the land of the Philistines. So the Philistines, as we pointed out, came from Kaftor, which was Crete in ancient times, if we will, right? And they are all in cahoots with each other, be it peace or be it war. All right, so let's go on. At the same time spoke the Most High by Isaiah, the son of Amos, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from thy loins, and put off thy shoe from thy foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. And the Most High said, Like as my servant Isaiah have walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign, and wonder unto Egypt and unto Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptian prisoners and the Ethiopians captive, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, their expectation, and of Egypt, their glory. And the inhabitant of this isle shall say in that day, Behold, such is our expectation, whether we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape? What's going on here? It is talking about, brothers and sisters, drama in layman terms. It is talking, brothers and sisters, about a conflict between the ancient nations, one with another. And it mentions, as we want to point out, all right, we're going to highlight that there, Egypt and upon Ethiopia. And it mentions the king of Assyria. And we want to highlight that as well, if we will. Underline, bold type, show in different color. Why do we do this? It's to show how these ancient nations and how the Israelite writings, the Bible, namely the Old Testament, and how it connects in this particular matter. So let us see what we're talking about for edification purposes, if we will, brothers and sisters. 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 13 to verse 14. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them, And Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent unto the king of Assyria to Lachish, saying, I have offended, return from me. That which thou puttest on me will I bear. And the king of Assyria appointed unto Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. So what are we talking here? Brothers and sisters, tribute. Today they call it rent. Tribute. Today they call it taxes. Tribute. Today they call it mortgage. It's the same thing that the king of Assyria laid upon him. It's the same thing that we are doing today while we have been besieged by these modern kings, if we will. So how sadly to show black history in this particular case, because just as the kings of Judah had to submit or did submit in part, not fully, but in part, to the kings of Assyria, such as what we went over on the channel Shomrei Habrit, which is run by the good brother Moreh Yitzhak, about how King Yoash of Israel paid tribute to Adad Nerari, brothers and sisters. And so what we see here is that Hezekiah was paying tribute to the king of Assyria. When you didn't pay the tribute, you got besieged. So these are things that we want to show for what we're talking about. Lachish is west of where Jerusalem is. All right. So let us remember what we read here. And it says, and they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, their expectation, and of Egypt, their glory, because of what the king of Assyria is going to do in that particular case. Let's go on and show, because we already showed how Israel, numerous times on this channel, how the Assyrians came up against the Israelites. All right, so let's go into this part here. And it says this: not only are the biblical texts, for its extensive and varied, bespeaking its importance of the ancient Judeans. We want to underline that. But they can be supplemented and coordinated more than any other event in Israelite history by a range of extra biblical evidence. The existence of Assyrian annalistic accounts of the campaign and of a detailed Assyrian palace relief, sequence of one of its episodes, the siege of Lachish, allows the rare chance to look at the event from both sides, Assyrian as well as Israelite. Now, brothers and sisters, this is not to sound disrespectful or anything of that sort, right? But Assyrian as well as Israelite, both of them are telling the same accounts of Israel losing and Assyria winning. When you have a record that agrees with each other, and this record dates back to the 8th century BCE, how can anybody deny the existence of the Israelites? See, it's not like a war between Ramses II and a war between the Hittites, where they both claim victory for the same war, which doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It just means that one of them, between Ramses and the king of the Hittites, in this particular case, one of them is embellishing the matter. In the matter between the Israelites and the Assyrians, there's no embellishment. Israel lost. And so in your book, the Bible, the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, if you will, if it talks about you losing, and then you can show where other nations spoke about the same time frame and the same wars of them winning, that shows credence to its existence. All right. Now, the statement we just read here came from a person that works at the Israeli Museum by the name of Peter Mentionist. Okay, let's go on. We want to point out, too, that the Babylonian king Merodach Baladan was defeated by Sennacherib. So, brothers and sisters, as we read right here, all right, in the Bible, in 2 Kings, we read as shown here, if we will, of Sennacherib. And Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, ruled in Babylon after he defeated, if we will, Merodach Baladan. Merodach Baladan, brothers and sisters, shows that you have the Chaldeans ruling in Babylon. All of these different things correlate in time frame. So what I wanted to do, thinking the Most High, in this particular case, is that you want to show the connection between the Israelites politically with the Ethiopians, socially with the Egyptians, and so forth and so on. All right. And how Assyria came up against each of them, because we spoke over and over about the Assyrians against the Israelites. We want to show other parts of the Bible and external to the Bible what we're talking about concerning said African nations. We, the Israelites, are not anti-Africa. Now, we know the terminology Africa comes by many statements of Scipio Africanus, who defeated the people of the Carthage in 146 BCE. We are already familiar how the terminology said of Africa began to be from the Roman province called Africa and Tunisia and Libya of modern today, and how colonizers and exploiters of that same continent spread the name even further to other places. So you had different aspects of how they say the name Africa came to be. All right. But that's one of the points that many do make in history on how that continent got that name. So that is a wide, extensive aspect of imperialism, if we will. All right. So let us go on, if you will, brothers and sisters, in this particular matter. Sennacherib's war and Ekron's matter of Padi. What are we talking about in this particular case, brothers and sisters? Is this so we can gain information for edification purposes. All right. I want to read something, brothers and sisters, and this is coming from a source not directly cited on a PowerPoint, but I wanted to get the right page. On page 123 of a book called Africa in the Bible, it says this, if we will. No, page 122. The nobles of Ekron rebelled against their ruler Padi and the Assyrians. A 5-line inscription discovered at Ekron names both Padi and his son Achish. Now, what we're talking about is what we're looking at right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-line inscription. Now, for those familiar with it, you might sit there and say, oh, that looks like Paleo-Hebrew. Because, brothers and sisters, these ancient nations wrote all in the same script in many cases. Sometimes you'll find Akkadian writing. Sometimes you might find Metuneta of ancient Egypt. Sometimes you might find the cuneiform of Sumer. Sometimes you may find Akkadian writing. But one of the things we want to point out, brothers and sisters, is that Edom, Israel, Judah, which is Judah is part of Israel, Moab, Ammon, and in many cases Philistia, they all wrote in a similar script. Now, what they refer to that as saying, okay, that is the Phoenician script. The word Phoenician comes from the Greek word meaning purple, which we're going to get into, brothers and sisters, on Monday, if we will, because this is a presentation we want to do tonight, Saturday night. There's one tomorrow night, most high willing, at 8 p.m. or 8:30. We're going to say 8:30 for the moment. All right. But those subscribe to the channel, if you click like and click subscribe and the bell, you will know when the presentation is going to go. So at this point, we're going to say anytime either 8 or 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, we're going to continue in part 2 of this presentation called, if we will, brothers and sisters, Black History in the Old Testament. This is just part 1 of it. Now, we want to look at this Sennacherib's war, if we will. This right here goes to show these are people from Lachish. So when the brother Laban Gabara stated, excellent point, Moray, and I thank you for that. This is them shown on the Sennacherib war about being defeated. Let's go on. Because no nation makes up a story of being defeated. That doesn't work out like that. 2 Chronicles 32 in the Shalom matter. After these things and the establishment thereof, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered into Judah and encamped against the fenced cities and thought to win them for himself. And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib was come and that he was purposed to fight against Jerusalem, he took counsel with his princes and his mighty men to stop the waters of the fountains that were without the city, and they did help him. So there was gathered much people together and stopped the fountains and the brook that ran through the midst of the land, saying, why should the kings of Syria come and find much water? And he strengthened himself and built up the wall that was broken and raised it up, the towers, and another wall without, meaning outside of its presence, and repaired Milo in the city of David, and made darts and shields in abundance. And he set captains of war over the people and gathered them together to him in the streets of the gate of the city and spoke comfortably to them, saying, be strong and courageous. Be not afraid nor dismayed for the king of Assyria, nor for all the multitude that is with him. For there be more with us than with him. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is Yah Elohim to help us and to fight our battles. And the people resisted, pardon me, and the people rested themselves upon the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. So it said they rested upon those words. They were comforted. So when we read, for instance, in Isaiah chapter 9, and it says, wonderful counselor is God the Almighty, the everlasting Father is the ruler of peace. During the time of Isaiah chapter 9, it's talking about King Hezekiah for those who know the history of what we're talking about. All right. That will get into another deeper matter when we get into a situation about that subject. Now, nonetheless, when you're looking at right here is the Shalom inscription that speaks, just as we see up here with what they refer to as Paleo or ancient Hebrew, so do we see it here. This is dated to the era of Hezekiah, king of Judah, during the time of the prophet Isaiah. So when they say, oh, there's no reference of Israelites or their writings before Herod or so forth and so on, that right there is actually incorrect. All right. We want to go back, if we will, to this part here. See, sadly, what the said conscious community does. All right. And we want to show, if we will, if I can. Nope, cannot. So let's just follow the arrow. What they try to do is separate right here. This is Egypt. Okay, black, all here, and everywhere else is white. Such is not the case. All right. So we just want to point that out, that the black man, regardless of his ethnicity, is all in this area here, all throughout all of this area right here. All right. There's actually a tribe in Nigeria that said they come from the waters over here in Yemen. Did you know that? Did you know that there's a tribe in Nigeria today that states their origin comes from Yemen? Do you know that the Ga and Ghana and in Togo area state that they come from the land of Israel? It's in the book I wrote, Egypt Talk and Writing, for those interested. All right. So, brothers and sisters, let's continue on in this. When Assyria invaded Judah, Judah did not become an Assyrian province. There was a mass grave of 1,500 victims found in Lachish, dated to the era of Hezekiah and Sennacherib. Now, brothers and sisters, why does that become important? Because it's not the fact of we needing to see the dead, but brothers and sisters, in this book here, the Ancient Black Hebrews, Volume 2, the Forensic Proof Simply Explained, this book is like $10 or less online. All right. Once it comes down to this here, it shows the skulls that were found by archaeologists dated, if we want to point this out, to 1930. In 1930 era, they found in the city of Lachish victims that had what you call Africanoid features, Negroid features. All right. And so This is something that needs to be pointed out for edification purposes. All right. So when we get into this kind of presentation, somebody wrote in Byron Israel Smith. He needs to copyright that one. Okay. I don't know which one is being talked about, an aspect of copyright matter, but all right. So I'm gonna just say to the brother Soter, in due respect, LOL, because I really didn't understand or know, as the brother put the emoji there, all right, about the whole copyright matter. Okay, now, brothers and sisters, this particular book that we're talking about right here, The Ancient Black Hebrews, Volume 2 by Gert Muller, you can get online. And that book talks, as we just stated, in the 1930 era, they found skulls of the people of Judah from when Sennacherib era done invaded that city. The Bible talks about the aspect, if we will, about your cities are burned with fire. Psalms chapter 79 says the dead are left there with none to bury them. So they just became graves on the ground itself. Many times when the people did a besiegement, there was not a proper burial. To take you back to that, David had to sit there and thank the people of Yabesh Gal'ad for a proper burial for King Saul. Because when nations go to war against each other, especially we talking those ancient times, it was not what you call Yafa or Yafeh or pretty. It was Milakama Kwasha, hard war. Milakama Kashuba, serious war. Not germ warfare, say done, or I'm going to take this bomb from way over there and then throw it over there and you don't ever see me. The ancient nations then, to put it in layman terms, walked up to you, pop, hole at. That's how those nations got down once it came down to war. Even when you talk about the Ethiopians and the Egyptians, there's a record from Dynasty 4, brothers and sisters, where they talked about cutting off the hand, the right hand of the Ethiopians. You understand? There's a record in the Bible that talks about David lining the people of the Moabites, kill one, skip, kill one, skip, kill one, skip. In the time of the Maccabees, in the Apocrypha, it says that Judas Maccabees and others, you understand, had to sit there and put the sword in water to get the blood off that was kicked up on the sword. So those nations in the ancient world were definitely about their war. We're going to get into this more tomorrow night when we talk about Israel and Egypt. We're talking about Assyria, Ethiopia, and Israel in this. Tomorrow night, Creator willing, we're going to talk about Egypt, Ethiopia, and Israel. More intense, if we will. All right, on this particular channel on StreamYard. Thanking the Creator for that. Yeah, it was hand-to-hand combat. This is why, for instance, in the Bible, in the Torah, the prophet Moses said, if you scared, lek beta, go home. Don't come to this war and being faint-hearted. I don't know. We can't. No. That's not the spirit to come in when you go and sit there and have to be there for your brother. Be there for your family. It says, if a man dedicated a house, let him go back to the house. If he just got married, let him go back to his family. So you already got, in the Israelite war matter, a bunch of men in their 20s and 30s, because obviously you're not going to have 50 and 60-year-olds fighting in most cases. So you got people in their prime strength, in their 20s and 30s, that's definitely going to be going up into war. And we read about the Israelites defeating the Moabites. We read about the Israelites losing to the Assyrians. We read about the Israelites going up and defending themselves against the Ethiopians. So these types of things we just want to show for edification purposes. To land back off of a matter, did you know that historians state that the Jews, we're going to cite what they state, the Jews had the upper hand against the Romans with their fists? Now, I'm not trying to come up here talking about Black history and drama and beef and who beat up who. That's not the main subject here. But do you know that when the Romans came against the Israelites, which is much later in history than what we're talking about here about Assyria, right, in Ethiopia and Israel, you know it said that the Jews had the upper hand with their fists. You don't want to combat and go toe to toe with the sons of the Levites in Israel. You don't want to do that. You don't want to combat Rome. And that's why when Titus of Rome, when he besieged the temple, you read in Josephus, they had to dig underneath the ground because they couldn't handle them eye to eye, hand to hand. The Romans could not defend themselves against the Israelites eye to eye, hand to hand. The ancient Assyrians used to use what they call today the calimpo, where they'll put rocks or whatever inside of something and cut the rope and it will sit there and go from one way yonder to the other. The Israelites used to make boulders in the era of Tiberius and Claudius and attack the Roman armies in that particular way later on in history. So Israel in the ancient times was fighting for their land, fighting for their home. And so were these other nations. At times they were at peace, and at times they were not. Somebody asked, who are the Assyrians today? All right, if we look at it, Assyria as a kingdom, in so many terms, brother Traylon, if I pronounced the name right, let me know. If not, I apologize. I apologize. The Assyrians in history vanished in history. If you want to say where they would have been at and where they migrated to, one source states that ancient Assyria migrated to northern Africa and what we call Tunisia, Algeria of today. There's a record that speaks about the Assyrians when their empire fell, fleeing over to that particular area there. That was not too far-fetched because Carthage was established by Canaanites and Israelites. So and that's in Tunisia. So going into northern Africa from the Levant and the quote unquote Middle East area was a regular thing. That's why in earlier history, before we talked about this era here, which predates to what this presentation is about, you may have heard of the Sea peoples, the Lucan, the Dardan people, aka in part the Sea peoples that went back and forth between Egypt and Byblos, and between Egypt and Lebanon area, if we will. So I would have to answer the question, and thank you for the question, that the Assyrians in one record migrated over to northern Africa, and those who stayed got absorbed with the different nations that came up in that particular area. The Arabs that you see, or the Arabian people that you see in modern Assyria, modern Syria as well, and the Palestinians is a mixture between those ancient black nations that were still there that came along later with the Ptolemies. This is why Israelites, sadly, no disrespect intended, they make a mistake, or I ain't gonna say we as Israel made a mistake, saying like all Arabs as Yishmael. No, they're not. All Arabian people are not Yishmael people. Yishmael, too, in part, became mixed up with the European nations, the Ptolemies, the Seleucids, the Romans that came along later. All right, so these are genes that we just want to point out for reference purposes. All right, now getting back into this, hopefully that answered your question, my brother. When it says, when Assyria invaded Judah, Judah did not become an Assyrian province. You understand? Judah, the people, the tribe, did not. Let's go on, if we will. All right. What are we seeing here? 2 Kings 19. So Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah. Libnah is a place in Judah, for he had heard that he was departed from Lachish. And when he heard say of Tahaka, king of Ethiopia, behold, he has come out to fight against thee, he sent messengers again unto Hezekiah, saying, all right, now, so what we're looking at right here on the left side is from the Bible in 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 8 and 9. What we're seeing on the right side is from the Kawa 4 steel. What the Kawa 4 steel, brothers and sisters, gets into is the matter of Tahaka and the Assyrians. What you're seeing, even inside of its Egyptian writing, if we will, is dated to the era of Dynasty 25 of Egypt. And what that talks about in its translation is the situation that happened between the Assyrians and the people of Dynasty 25. That is referred to as the Kawa Force Deal. So we want to show how all of this history does intertwine one with another. All right. And so let's go on, if we will, to the next part. Isahardon and Tahaka, or son. Usan Nahu. Now, Usan Nahu is the son, brothers and sisters, of Tahaka. All right. So let's go on and see what it says. Tahaka, as pointed out in the Bible, he's mentioned, was the most important king of Dynasty 25. He made more monuments of himself than any other of the 25th dynasty kings combined. Now, what do we want to point out and how they try to sit there and play games in what they call Black history? All right. And like Black History Month, which is really, we know this kind of history cannot just be covered in a month. All right. But in its great totality, but we want to respectfully take advantage of the time when the people are listening to such a matter, right? They try to refer to that as sub-Saharan Africa. Egypt being north of that. Libya being north of that. We want to go back, if we will, and show this right here. These guys are Black. That's Tahaka, and next to that, on the left-hand side, is Shabaka, which we spoke about earlier. They try to say Dynasty 25 of Egypt is when the Black pharaohs ruled. But if you look at the pictures of Seti, of Dynasty 19, when you look at the pictures of Ramses, when you look at the picture of Necho-Hembre, who assassinated Josiah of Judah, those were Black men. So you can't just limit the Black kings of Egypt to just Dynasty 25 unless you're dealing with colonialism and imperialism. See, because ancient Egypt and ancient Israel were defeated by the Greeks and conquered or so by the Romans, they can show them looking like any kind of way. You can't do that to the Cushites. Ethiopia and Sudan remain Black. The true Egyptians that we've been talking about, did you know, fled into the Sudan? When you go into a book by Alfred Butler called The Arab Invasion of Egypt, that's a book online, is where you can find the source where, brothers and sisters, the true Egyptians wound up migrating to the Sudan area. So they pushed them even further south, just like Israel was pushed further south. But we already discussed the diaspora of Israel over and over and over on this channel. All right, so we want to sit there and show other matters of history for edification purposes. Esarhaddon spoke of Manasseh, king of Judah. This is Esarhaddon, as we see here in this picture. All right, that's that guy right here. That's Esarhaddon, and that is supposed to be Tahaka and Tahaka's son or crown prince, Usan Awuhu. Now, why does this become important? Because the Assyrians conquered the people of Egypt and Ethiopia in history. Esarhaddon did it, and then later on, his successor, Ashurbanipal, did it. Why does that become important in what we're talking about? Because when we go back here to Isaiah 20, it says, and Yah said, like as my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptian prisoners and the Ethiopian captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, the expectation, and of Egypt, their glory. So we see Egypt, Ethiopia mentioned in the same era that Hezekiah is ruling in Judah. We mentioned Hezekiah in Tahaka in the book of Kings 18 and 19, talking about the same time frame. So now when we see Esarhaddon, the Assyrian king, making a boast that he defeated, in this case, the Egyptians and the Ethiopians, we can see what the Bible is talking about in its prophecy. This is why we talked about in this presentation Black history in the Old Testament. All right, so let's go on, if we will. Shemite people, Asiatics, were brought to Memphis during the era of Taharqa. Remember earlier we mentioned, because we wanted to have that highlighted, right? Remember when it spoke about Shabaka, who was a 25th dynasty, Ethiopian ruling in Egypt's 25th dynasty? And we mentioned Memphis, right? Remember that? We're going to show it in different colors so it stand out. And this Memphis here, why was that highlighted? Because it gets right back into this here. Because, all right, Memphis during the era of Taharqa, the Asiatic nations, which is a broad terminology for people in the Levant area, were in Memphis, which is in Egypt. That would have included, brothers and sisters, the Israelites. The Israelites were not foreign to going to African places. We've been pointing this out as Hebrewisms of West Africa and the book From Babylon and Timbuktu points out. Let's go on. 2 Kings 19 and Esarhaddon's boast. Sorry. Well, you can say he boasted and posted. All right, let's go on. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. And it came to pass, as he was worshiping in the house of En, his god, that Adramelech and Sherazar, his son, smote him with the sword. And they escaped into the land of Armenia. And Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his stead. Now, this is out of the Bible. Esarhaddon reigned instead of his father, Sennacherib. Sennacherib, we pointed out, defeated in part the Babylonian people when the Chaldeans were ruling in Babylon. Now, Esarhaddon, as we see here in the Bible in 2 Kings 19, he goes on to say the following of himself. I conquered Tyre, which is in the midst of the sea. Its king, Baal, who trusted upon Taharqa, he trusted. I took away all his city and harbor. I conquered Egypt, Patros, and Cush. Its king Taharqa, I wounded 5 times with my arrow. His entire land I took possession and ruled. Taharqa, Egypt, Patros, and Cush. Patros is by modern day Sudan. Now, don't that sound like the biblical prophecy of Isaiah 20 coming to pass even in the ancient world? So they say in sociology or so that over 60% of the Old Testament prophecy came to pass. How then do you have a New Testament when there's prophecies and laws in the Old Testament that's still coming to pass? Hint. All right, so now getting into this, it says, Esarhaddon spoken was seeking of himself, who trusted upon Taharqa. I took away all his city and harbor. I conquered Egypt, Patros, and Cush. Its king, Taharqa, I wounded 5 times with my arrow. So Esarhaddon, who was the son of Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, who was the father of Ashur-bani-pal, brothers and sisters, spoke about conquering Cush and Mizraim, Ethiopia and Egypt, like it says the Assyrians would do in Isaiah 20. Let's go on if we will. All right, for edification purposes. Bring it on home, Israel. How does this tie in? Rejoice not, O Israel, for joy, as other people, for thou hast gone a whoring from thy power, thy God. Thou hast loved a reward upon every corn floor. Everywhere I can sit there and find something, I'm going to make it mine. Israel forgot their resting place. And Hosea 9, it continues to say, the floor and the wine press shall not feed them, and the new wine shall fail in her. They shall not dwell in the Most High's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt, and they shall eat unclean things in Assyria. See how this all ties in to what we're talking about, Old Testament people in the Bible, right? Egypt, Assyria, Ephraim. They shall not offer wine offerings to the Most High, neither shall they be a pleasing unto him. I remember in the camp when I was younger, a camp called Koshe'erit Bene Yisrael, which was located in the Bronx in New York. And I remember on Shabbat, we used to say the prayers, it may it be in an acceptable time, our offerings of our lips and things of that nature. So when I was reading this, it kind of struck a chord back when I was making this presentation. Right? Let's go on. All that eat thereof shall be polluted, for their bread, for their soul shall not come into the house of the Most High. What shall ye do in the solemn day, and in the day of the feast of the Most High? For lo, they are gone because of destruction. Ephraim shall gather them up. Memphis shall be, oh, we made a mistake. For lo, they are gone because of destruction. Egypt shall gather them up. Memphis shall bury them. The pleasant places of silver, nettles shall possess them. Thorns shall be their tabernacle. What does it say? All right. For the day of visitation, the days of recompense. Okay. Didn't want to sit there and do that. Sorry about that. If we will. Goes on to say, the days of visitation are come, the days of recompense. Israel shall know it. The prophet is a fool. The spiritual man is blind for the multitude of thine iniquity and the great hatred. What are we reading in Hosea chapter 9, brothers and sisters? Egypt shall gather them and Memphis shall bury them. Did we not just point out here that during the era of Esarhaddon and the era of Taharka, that there were Asiatic Shemite people in Memphis? See how this history is tying in. Let's go in. The watchman of Ephraim was with my God, but the prophet is a snare and a fowler in all his ways, and hatred in the house of his God. They have deeply corrupted themselves, as in the days of Gibeah. Therefore, he will remedy their iniquity. He will visit their sins. Let's go on, as it says, right? I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first ripe in the fig tree at her first time. And they went to Baal Peor and separated themselves unto that chain, and their abominations were according as they loved. Do you know what Baal Peor is? It was a sexual god that the men would go, brothers and sisters, and have sex with the women and praise of that particular god. That's what you read of in the book, brothers and sisters, of Numbers chapter 25. What does it say here in Hosea 9, verse 10? I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first ripe in the fig tree at her first time. So now when we see Israel mentioned in Hosea, and Hosea was before the time of Isaiah, what can we gather? In Isaiah, the 53rd chapter, it says, who would believe our report? And to whom would the arm of the Most High revealed? For he grew up before him as a tender plant and as a root out of a dry ground. So when we start talking about the dry ground and plants, we see the same thing: wilderness, grapes, first ripe fig tree, plant, wilderness, dry ground, Israel, Hosea before Isaiah. Isaiah 53 is talking about the history of Israel in relation to the nations. We're going to get into that on another channel, the breakdown of the explanation of Isaiah 53. But back into this particular portion here. It says this: as for Ephraim, their glory shall fly away like a bird from the birth, and from the womb, and from the conception. Though they bring up their children, yet will I bereave them, and there shall be not a man left. Yea, woe also to them when I depart from them. Ephraim, as I saw Tyrus, which is Tyre, is planted in a pleasant place, but Ephraim shall be brought forth, his children, to the murderer. In other words, they'll have children that's going to be delivered into the hands of their enemies. Give them, Yah, what thou wilt give. Give them a miscarrying womb and dry breasts, or their wickedness is in Gilgal, for there I hated them. For the wickedness of their doings, I will drive them out of my house. I will love them no more. And it says, all their princes are revolters. Ephraim is smitten, their root is dried up. They shall bear no fruit. Yea, though they bring forth, yet will I slay even the beloved fruit of their womb. My God will cast them, meaning Israel. My God will cast them away because they did not hearken unto him, and they shall be wanderers among the nations. So in Hosea 9, when it says that Israel, their kingdom, which was Ephraim by name, shall be wanderers among the nations, what are we talking about? Israel being cast out of their land, like Deuteronomy 28 says, and being in the hands of their enemies. And many times doing what they refer to now as Black History Month. Slavery is not where we started, and that's true. Our roots go back to ancient Israel. Ancient Israel's roots go back to ancient Chaldea. We pointed out that Godfrey Higgins, in his book Anacalypsis, stated that the Chaldean people were originally Negroes. In this channel, when you go through it, you will begin to see History Presented to the Masses, Volume 3, on this channel. It can be put inside the description when this is uploaded. I show the pictures of how the ancient Egyptians, Ethiopians, Babylonians, Philistines, Canaanites looked. And we already shown earlier from the Sennacherib War how Judah looked. If you miss it, here you go. Like the saying, want to see it? Here you go. This is it here. This is here in part how the tribe of Judah looked. Notice something about this? The afro. Who has that kind of hair? Who has hair like lamb's wool, as described, say, in the book of Daniel? People of color, Black people. All right. The two books available online on Amazon. All right, for those interested. You have From Assyria to America, the 12 tribes are in derision. And From Assyria to America, Part 2. This book here, brothers and sisters, which I'm showing being expanded, this book here came out last week, giving thanks unto the Most High. This book here, with the blue writing, brothers and sisters, came out last year in 2020. This book here on the right side came out last week, 2021. Giving thanks to the Most High that that book was released, brothers and sisters. February 1st, the beginning of said Black History Month. These books are available online for $15 each. For those who want it, you can look it up by name. From Assyria to America, and you will see that come up for those interested. Giving honor and praise to the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. This presentation is concluded for the night. All right. Tune in tomorrow night, brothers and sisters. We're going to say 8, if not 8, 8:30. All right. For the presentation on the same channel, Sunday, the date being February 7th, on this channel, Black History in the Old Testament, Part 2. My number, 908-587-4841, for those who are interested. Giving honor and praise unto Yah, creator, maker of heaven and earth. Shalom, brothers and sisters. Tune in tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Shalom. Most High bless and keep you.